I kind of want to start by talking about the way this issue has been handled. I feel there's kind of a bipartisan approach to Ukraine, though there is some dissent. So, kind of speak to that. I mean, why is Ukraine such a bipartisan cause in so many spaces?
That's a great question. I think that there is bipartisan support for Ukraine. I mean, given that they have been really brutally invaded and and endured really some terrible suffering because of the nature of the attack and the targeting that Putin uses, and the kind of tactics that the Russian military uses, heavy amounts of artillery, um, targeting of infrastructure, particularly power plants and heating plants. And so it's quite natural that the U.S. Congress and the White House would agree that Ukraine needs our support. In the last year or so, I would say there has been some differences of opinion about how much the United States should do. Uh, I mean, the first year of the war, there was absolutely no problem getting the House and the Senate to move on these big packages of arms to Ukraine. But I would say in the last year or so, basically, ever since the presidential campaign got going, there's been a difference of opinion as to how much we should give them and under what terms. Um, and I think also there's been a lot of questioning about what the strategy is. And so there are many on the Republican side and some on the Democratic side too, who have been pushing the present administration to come up with a strategy. I mean, what is our goal here? It's really, I think, most people in Washington no longer accept this slogan that we'll stick with Ukraine as long as it takes. And that I think questioning of that really started with the people hate using this word, but the stalemate that's emerged after the Ukrainian counteroffensive really stalled out. So now I think uh, we have a new administration coming in that really wants to do things in a very different way. Um, on the one hand, there is a real reluctance on the part of the incoming Republican administration to continue giving Ukraine, whatever it wants. Um, and there's also a questioning of whether or not it's in the U.S. national interests to basically send tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine uh, when there is no end in sight. The I think the other difference will be the uh, the reluctance to really apply military leverage against Putin. And what I mean by that is some of the limitations that the Biden administration has put on on the arms that we're providing, not allowing them to hit targets deep into Russia. There have been not a majority in the Republican House and Senate, but a strong and vocal part of the Republican Congress that has called on the Biden administration to take the handcuffs off, as it were,
And we did see the president actually allowed long range missiles to be used in Russia for the first time since the start of the war not too long ago. And that was a really big step for Ukraine. But there definitely is that part of the country that is feeling the isolationist views because they're not entirely new, but we are starting to kind of see a resurgence of isolationist views. And of course, President-elect Trump, he actually ran on the America First platform,
Right.
which is
Right.
popular with a certain segment of the
It
population.
is. It is. I mean, there is a very, I think, understandable weariness with with the history of American military interventionism, really stemming from 2001, with wars in what people call the forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that tendency towards isolationism, America First, really I think stems from that. Uh, I think that, speaking personally, one one thing that bothers me about this tendency is the reluctance to act with allies, the reluctance to act using a multilateral platform, and I'm talking about NATO, and the tendency to um, to put restrictions on our own contributions to our collective security. What I mean by that is, uh, some of the pronouncements of President-elect Trump that there are Europeans who are freeloaders who aren't, paying their fair share, um, and I think this is very counterproductive. I think we get a heck of a lot more out of NATO than NATO gets out of us. I mean, sure, we do provide the nuclear umbrella, um, but when push comes to shove, uh, if we are really threatened, we know that NATO, maybe not all, whatever it is, 32 members, but that most of NATO will come to our aid. That the collective security part of the NATO treaty is Article 5. And Article 5 is, just to summarize, is just an attack on one is an attack on all. And there's only one time that Article 5 has been invoked.
NATO has definitely become a huge talking point because you do
Yeah.
often hear President-elect Trump kind of talk about Europeans not paying their fair share with NATO. And that's something that I don't think we've really heard before. Is that unique to him, or is this a different viewpoint we've heard?
No, no, it's not unique to him. I was at NATO 2004 to 2007, and there was an agreement, kind of a gentleman's agreement or a political agreement, that all countries would pay at least, it was a floor, not a ceiling, at least 2% of GDP on national defense. And when I was there, it was a minority of NATO countries that were spending more than 2%. It's now a majority, partially thanks, I think, to Donald Trump, really insisting that they pay more. But I think the reason more um, is what's happening in Ukraine now. I mean, that's happening in the heart of Europe. The one of the largest countries in Europe has been invaded. But we even when I was there, it's now 20 years ago, we always put in the talking points. When a Secretary of State came over or Secretary of Defense, we always put that in the talking points, that countries really need to come up with the 2%. It was done more kind of, behind closed doors in bilateral meetings. But President Trump, of course, made it a very public thing.
You have Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky often making the plea for more support. But if you're in his shoes, how exactly do you make the case to a lot of Americans who are obviously hesitant about more aid? And then, of
Yeah,
course, the White House itself, which may not want to budge on more aid. So, what
yeah,
would you do if you were in his shoes?
right. Defeat is not an option in this conflict. And if even if you are more focused on China, as the incoming Trump administration is, you do not want Ukraine to fail. And they are outgunned and outnumbered. Their population is, gosh, I don't know, maybe one third of the population of Russia. And if we allow Putin to change the borders of Europe by force, it sends a signal to other non-democratic powers, first and foremost, China, which has its own dispute, territorial dispute with Taiwan. So that's kind of the first thing I think he says. I think the other thing is uh, by helping Ukraine, we're helping ourselves because most of this money stays in America. In other words, the weapons come from here. They're built here in American factories by American workers. So I think that's another, and that's that is an argument that the White House has been making to congressmen and senators that this money goes to provide jobs for Americans.
And we also
So
saw that other factor, though, with this war as well, which was North Korean troops that have also come
right,
to
good
Russia
point,
to fight
Jaden.
in Ukraine.
That was a bit of a game changer. I think that it it really showed that this was not just a regional war, that we are now looking at a global conflict. That there has emerged a new axis of illiberal authoritarian powers, Iran, which is providing uh, these cruise missiles and other bombs to kill Ukrainian civilians. And now you have around 10,000 North Korean troops who are on the ground and fighting. So um, I think that was the main reason that President Biden changed his stance uh, on the range of our weapons, allowing Russia to use them. I'm allowing Ukraine to use them on Russian territory.
And what's really intriguing here, too, is the fact that you kind of have to watch what the other does in order to respond, because it seems like there's one nudge and then you have the US nudge right back. But this is a situation where it's kind of interesting and unpredictable. But you really don't see a lot of communication, I don't think, with the US and Russia directly, because
Yeah,
are those voices that say we have to talk to them. But at
right.
the same time, though, there is this war going on with Ukraine and this invasion happening. So
Yeah,
the US
yeah,
effectively communicate its mission and its goals, objectives with Russia without, of course, leaving Ukraine on the back burner.
yeah. I have to admit, I'm old enough that I go back to the Cold War. I served in Moscow during the Soviet days, and even though we had a Cold War going on, there was much more dialogue going on then than there is now. And most of that dialogue was via the various arms control talks. Um, so we don't have that dialogue anymore. It's a scary situation. I would say that uh, our level of dialogue or whatever communication, we haven't seen this kind of lack of channels really since the days of Stalin. I'm afraid to say that, but it's true. And also these arms control agreements, they build trust, they build contacts between our militaries, because there would be, channels of communication. Also, site visits were always built into, so you'd have American forces going to, Russian sites, and Russians going to American sites. It's all gone. The only, we had several conventional arms agreements that they've all been abrogated. We had an intermediate range nuclear missiles agreement. It was basically, they basically were abolished. That's gone, and now we see missiles going back in, uh, that can hit Europe. Uh, the only one we have is the START agreement, which is for strategic nuclear weapons. But even there, the site visits are no longer, the contacts are gone, and it's a little scary. I mean,
Yeah. And it makes
there's
clear,
still the hotline, thank God, where we can communicate that way.
yeah. But you just
Uh,
see that nuclear weapons are continuing to grow in number. I mean, it's definitely when you
yeah,
look at it by the amount, you see that everyone is kind of arming themselves, ready for something to happen. There's distrust there.
yeah, yeah. The distrust is very worrisome.
And obviously, President-elect Trump has a strong relationship with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Do you think that that could be a good thing in terms of ending this war, or could it maybe just bring about a neutrality in this war?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me step back a little bit and say that I think that there's a consensus among the allies, among the Ukrainians, that this war uh, needs to be wound down. The the difficulty is that Putin has not stepped back from his maximalist goals, and that's these are they have he has maximalist territorial goals, and it's difficult for me to see how he could stand down from those goals and keep pace with his people. Um, so I mean, you know, I also know from dealing with the Russians when I was a foreign service officer and an ambassador that when you seem too eager to come to an agreement, um, that's when the Russians will take advantage of you. If you want something more than they do, they see that as something to be exploited for them to get more of what they want and less of what you want. So I'm concerned about that. To come in saying we're going to solve this, they're going to say, "You want to solve this? Well, give us everything that we need, and you can solve it. Otherwise, you can't solve it." And so I think a lot of supporters of Ukraine and supporters of solidarity with our NATO allies are nervous that uh, some of these important principles will be thrown over the side of the boat in the name of of getting an agreement. Uh, and of course, the main principle is you shouldn't reward aggressors for changing borders.
We're definitely going to be in for an interesting few months because, I mean,
Oh
we've
yeah,
seen the foreign policy situation in the US really intensify. Obviously, you have things going on in the Middle East right now as well, but obviously, this conflict going back to February 2022 is when the invasion began. I mean, there's a chance for things to shake up a bit. So it's going to be
yeah,
interesting to follow.
yeah. And even if you get a ceasefire, it doesn't mean that the conflict is over.
Right.
Putin has never seen an agreement that that he likes or that he sees that he can't change. And I think it's really difficult for me to see how uh, any kind of ceasefire can be sustained without really strong deterrence in place. And by deterrence, I mean uh, some kind of security guarantees that if if Putin breaks this agreement, decides to grab more territory, that we will impose huge costs on him. And of course, the best security guarantee is NATO membership. But I can't see that. uh, I can't see that being offered by the incoming administration.
Yeah, we've even seen it be a very slow process under the Biden administration where there has
Yes,
been a desire to do it, but
yeah,
not happening.
you're right. You're right. It's been a big disappointment for me that they have not really, taken on a leadership role trying to gather support for providing security guarantees.
I really appreciate you taking the time to offer your expertise on this. I know not many can, and I appreciate you doing it.